All right, good morning. So as you heard, my name's Charles. I like to describe myself as manufactured in the UK, sourced from Ghana, distributed globally. It's a pleasure to be here on what is, when I think about this topic, innovation drive, navigating the investment landscape in Africa's technology and AI frontier. When you think of all of the conversations that are happening around us at the moment, for me, I feel that this is the centerpiece that is really driving the narrative in Africa at the moment, and which is ultimately giving a lot of hope for the opportunity that lies ahead. If we go back a decade, the Africa tech ecosystem has grown by nearly 10 times, right? It's certainly something when I started my sort of business entrepreneurship journey in Africa, I didn't think we'd actually be here in terms of some of the numbers that we're seeing. Now, in terms of transactions, the number of investors, we've got 3,000 investors, 3,000 rounds, over 20 billion invested over the last 10 years. 68% of that has been over the last 3 years, just to show you the sort of compounding growth that we've seen. And we've seen VC activity sort of accelerate from a handful of countries, the usual suspects, from Nigeria, the Kenyas, the South Africa, to over 38 countries, right? And we're now in a position where we've got entrepreneurs almost everywhere able to access investor capital that they use to build and change the places that they come from. Fast forward to July 2024, and what we've seen is the African Union have now endorsed the Continental AI Strategy. Now, AI as a topic is certainly making headlines all across the world, in Africa not least. The African Union have made a commitment to Africa-centric development and a focused approach to AI, which is promoting ethical, responsible, and equitable practices across the continent. Now, there's a big hope that AI holds transformative potential for Africa and will drive the digital revolution, impacting sectors like healthcare, agriculture, education, finance, public services. Ultimately, technology is seen as an enabler for many of the sectors that we need for the next revolution of Africa's development. When we look at the adoption of AI, even in its fairly early infancy, according to the Stanford AI Index, countries such as Kenya, we've seen that 27% of Kenyans currently using ChatGPT, which when you think of even access to the internet, access to electricity, it's actually quite a significant number. But the question we got to ask ourselves is, in 2024 right now, is the party over before it even started? So in 2023, many of you will know that despite 3.5 billion being raised in around 500 deals, Africa VC investments have sort of experienced a bit of a significant downturn of around 46% in total funding for the first time in 8 years since people really started tracking this, certainly the likes of Partech. And that's a sort of 30% decline in deal count. By contrast, post-COVID, we had the challenges of 2022, and the region actually stood out as being fairly resilient in a global context when you consider how it performed against the rest of the world. However, despite there being a downward global trend, we've seen that Africa's trend has actually trended below the rest of the world. So the question is, we've been hinging a lot on technology and the AI revolution, but is it still relevant? So, given this, we have some questions to answer. The first is, for some of those who may be new to this, what is tech and the AI opportunity? How big is it? And is it real or is it a fad? We then need to ask ourselves, why is the investment trend negative at this point in time? Should we be investing in it? And if so, how do we navigate the challenges and the various different nuances of investing in technology in Africa? And finally, is it what Africa needs? Will it make a difference? Is it accelerating Africa's marginalization? Or is it a cause for hope in the future of the African continent? So, I'm not going to answer these questions. We've got people far more qualified to do that. And here to join me, I hope we have 3 individuals. And what unites them is their focus on African economic development. So first, we have Emea Upahai. Please join us. So Amir is a venture partner at Flourish Ventures. He invests in disruptive organizations creating economic opportunity for people in emerging markets with a focus on Africa. Next, we have Ramez El-Sarafi. Welcome, Ramez. Ramez is CEO of AFSIC Labs, an early-stage investment in bright and passionate entrepreneurs with cutting-edge ideas in the MENA region. And then I'm hoping we have Olaoluwa, who does not appear to be here. So we will, unless anyone feels that they are an expert in AI and investment in African technology, we will continue without him. And I will join the other panelists for the session. All right, can we give him a round of applause, please? All right, so guys, welcome.
Thank you.
Can you just take a moment to maybe introduce yourselves and say why you're important for the African ecosystem?
Go ahead. Thank you. So my name is Ramez El-Sarafi. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of AFSIC Labs. We are an early stage and a seed investor, actually the most active seed investor in the Middle East and North Africa. We have invested in more than 500 startups to date since 2011, so been 13 years. Actually, this week is our 13th anniversary for AFSIC Labs, so have been around for quite some time. Work with so many startups, mainly across the Middle East and North Africa, as I mentioned, and we're currently in the process of expanding the AFSIC Labs footprint to cover East and West Africa as well. We have already announced the Africa Seed Fund under AFSIC Labs, which will be covering Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, Tanzania in the east, Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal, and Cameroon and Cote d'Ivoire in the west, alongside, of course, North Africa, where we are currently present in Egypt and Tunisia, and also expanding to Morocco. So it will be our first regional fund, and it's a very significant step for AFSIC Labs because most of our model so far has been focused on local ecosystems and local countries. And I think just like the fact that our first regional fund to cover multiple countries in Africa is a very significant step for us. And Africa is a very important market, and happy to cover that during our conversation, but also would like to give you the chance to introduce yourself.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I was hoping that some sort of an AI agent would appear for Ola here, you know. You might have sent...
For the third panelist, we have like...
You can just ask ChatGPT questions for Ola.
That's why I've left this chat.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Amay. I'm a partner at Flourish Ventures. Flourish is a purpose-driven venture fund. We invest in financial health of individuals and businesses, and what we mean by financial health is basically helping people manage money better. We do that by making early-stage investments in fintech companies across the globe. We have a portfolio of about 80 companies, much lesser than Ramez, but we invest in slightly later stage, so that's seed, Series A, Series B. We have a portfolio where assets under management of $750 million, operational in US, Latin America, India, Southeast Asia, and Africa and Middle East, and I lead our work in Africa and Middle East. So yeah, happy to talk about investments in Africa. I don't know how much I know about AI, but I have a perspective which I can share.
Okay. All right, fantastic. So just before we get into it, I want you guys to just dream a little. And it's 2024 now. Let's say
it's almost ending, so
it's all
crazy.
Yeah,
Crazy.
Do some quick maths. Takes us kind of to 2025. What's your dream for the African continent in the next 10 years? Like, where could it be? What's the dream that you've got? And then also, where do you think it will actually be in 10 years' time?
Yeah, I think that's like maybe the $100 billion question. I don't know, I think maybe I'll speak from a personal perspective about this coming from Egypt and North Africa. We have always felt like there's this kind of disconnect between North Africa and the rest of the continent. And I think it's very apparent. Now I think with the, it's so funny because like actually I think venture capital and seeing our startups in North Africa and in Egypt expanding to new markets, and now a lot of VC funds investing in Egypt and North Africa, this has been definitely seeing a tremendous amount of growth over the last 5 years, which actually is one of the few bright things about how we can create this kind of interconnectivity between our markets. What I'm really hoping to see in 10 years. And this is actually was a conscious decision that we took as Flat6 Labs, that Egypt, from our perspective on the map, belongs to Africa, not to the Middle East, because like we also have operations in Saudi and the rest of the MENA region. We want to create this kind of interconnectivity across the continent. We believe that there are so many opportunities that remain to be untapped when it comes to tech in general, and we want to see this evolving. We see that there are a lot of similarities between Egypt and Nigeria, for example, as markets, more than Egypt and maybe Dubai. And I think also have seen that in our startups and their business models, and whenever they think about expansion now they are thinking about maybe, yes, Saudi remains to be one of the biggest markets for Egyptian startups or North African startups to expand to. However, many of them now have started to think about going to Kenya or Nigeria as their first market to expand to outside of Egypt, which is great. And I'm hoping within the next 10 years that this will be the norm. We are launching our fund alongside the accelerator program that we run with Flat6 Labs to be a Pan-Africa accelerator, and this will be one of the first Pan-Africa accelerators to cover the whole, like mainly North and East and West Africa at the same time, where we'll have almost the same balance of number of startups. And our dream is to actually see a startup starting in Lagos, but actually deploying their product in Cairo within a few months later, or connecting with investors in Nairobi and exploring the market in Morocco also within like a very short period of time. And we're here to help them achieve that. So yeah, that's our dream.
Okay. So if I could pin you down for the investors in the room, are you pro investment in Africa or?
100%, yeah.
That is not an objective opinion.
No, I think, again, it's not black and white, right? Because like I understand, and I think like just if you have seen how the VC landscape has evolved in Africa over the last last 5 years have been very interesting, right? Because I think it started with like 2019, so like maybe the beginning of the growth, and then during COVID, there's like this huge jump in terms of like number of deals, and we've seen so many, I don't know what we call them now, like I think the fun word is like tourist investors who come like from other international markets to Africa, like invest in one or a couple of startups, and then they go back home and they never actually speak to the startup again, or actually maybe they invested in them over Zoom and they have never been to that country, or they understand what actually the market means for them. I'm hoping that we're over this. That said, it doesn't actually also take away from the value that many of these international investors could bring to the continent. We're hoping to see more of them, but actually we're hoping to see more of them, like for example, like Flourish is doing, and other bigger VCs, the international VCs that actually have operations and offices across the world that actually can connect all these regions together. I think it's very important, like, maybe again, from a very selfish perspective, we always talk about like seed investments and how it's severely underfunded in Africa. Although I know because of like the majority of the deals, they skew more towards the seed, since there are smaller deals and many more startups at the beginning rather than later stage. However, it's still actually very underfunded. And I know the underfunding is happening across the multiple stages. So we wish to see more capital coming into Africa. We would like to see more local investors and regional investors within Africa investing in venture capital, investing in startups. If you think about it, the majority of the capital that's coming to Africa today is very DFI-led, so it's not actually happening from within Africa. Like the case in Egypt, for example, like the 3 or 4 major VCs we have in Egypt, like 90% of their funding is actually DFI money. So we'd like to see more money being mobilized within VC in Africa, directly into startups and through VC funds. Yeah, and definitely this will lead to the growth we are all aspire to see.
Okay, thank you.
Can I give you a laundry list and then sort of abstract from it?
Let's do it.
Appreciating currencies, good governments, non-corrupt governments, US interest rates remaining low, more export, local manufacturing, more intra-country trade, better talent coming into Africa, and more exits. And I think if I abstract back from that laundry list, and I'm going to take a bit of a global perspective because we invest in several regions, but I have been focused on Africa for the last 10 years. I actually grew up in Botswana. I think the biggest challenges facing startups in Africa across different segments have nothing to do with those startups. They're structural challenges. First challenge is market size, and I think Ram has referred to this. So you have to build a regional business. And you have to appreciate how different this is from someone building in Brazil or US or India. I'm Indian and I spent 10 years investing in India. And this is not one of the conversations the founders needed to have. And it's such a vital conversation in Africa. And especially after the macro, I would call it crisis we have seen in the last 2 years across most of the major markets. I think it's not a strategic choice now, it's an imperative. You have to have that mentality of building a multi-country, multi-currency business. So that's number one, it's market size. Number two, I think it's macro. I have several companies in my portfolio which I consider to be very well run, profitable, $60 to $70 million in revenue, which would have raised funding in 2 weeks in the US. And I'm speaking from experience because we have companies in the US which are doing worse but raising money, which can't raise capital right now because there's a Nigeria discount and an Egypt discount. And that's legitimate because people are worried about currencies depreciating even more and their capital getting locked. So that's number two. And finally, I think talent is a huge issue still. And I'm hoping that there are more people doing what you're doing, Charles, and solving for that. So I think as taking a step back, my dream is that people in this room can solve some challenges, but several of those are outside of our remits. We can do our best, but I'm also hoping that other forces that influence all of this also pan out. We need some luck in Africa too, outside what we have to do. Yeah. I'm sorry if that sounds too pessimistic, but I think that's the realistic perspective.
All right. Well, we heard the dreams. And so you are bullish?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I will say one more thing. I think we need to, if you just gave some capital to a computer and said be a global capital allocator and invest purely on risk-adjusted returns per dollar, all of the capital would go to NASDAQ. I'm serious. There's nobody that beats dollar returns over 10-year periods than NASDAQ. And so we have to believe that everybody who's investing in venture is investing for more than just commercial returns. We're investing in entrepreneurs, we're investing in jobs, we're investing in bottoms-up development, and it's just a fact. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. Even if you say that you just want to return capital to your LPs, you won't be in this business if it was just about returns.
True.
So I think we have to have that mindset and not just talk about what is the IRR from, where are the exits in Africa, and it'll take time. I think we're still in Fund 1 in Africa. Yeah. The real VC investing started in 2016, 2017, so we have to give it time. And I'm very, very bullish.
But that's why we shouldn't let AI do VC, you know? Sorry? It's like it will just pick NASDAQ all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Or like startups in the US or Silicon Valley, I guess.
But objectively speaking, do you think a time will come when you look at it from a pure IRR perspective, Africa is the place to invest?
I am long on that time coming. These things move in cycle. I'm long on that time coming, but I think it will take more time in coming.
Right.
Yeah.
That is my perspective.
What's your estimation? How many years?
I think for us to, let's narrow it down because we both had big aspirations. But if we narrow it down and say, okay, we started venture investing in Africa really in 2015, 2016, and maybe Egypt even slightly later, Ramez. When are we going to see good exits, real returns from the portfolio of companies that got invested here? I would say another 5 to 6 years for the first wave to IPO. I'm talking about the likes of Flutterwave. Fowry already did IPO, but I'm talking about the next set of companies, which are payment infrastructure companies, going and IPOing.
Yeah.
I'd say 5 to 6 years.
All right. How about you?
I've been around for a while, right? So, and I've seen it like we started during the Arab Spring in Egypt, right? So it was one of the most. Like, now we're talking about this being a difficult time. Just imagine doing what we were doing in 2011 and 2013, where actually we couldn't physically go to our office because there were protests in the streets and like it was blocked for like months. And there was like no work from home back then, so we actually had to go to the office and meet with the startups physically and all of that. So I think we have seen worse than actually maybe what the current downturn is. And we're always very optimistic. We, despite all of this, actually we kept like investing in startups. There isn't like 1 year where AFSIC Labs didn't invest in startups in Africa or the Middle East at large. And we kept investing, kept deploying capital. Even during the worst of times, we managed to create companies and support companies that attracted local and foreign capital to be invested in them.
Yeah.
We managed to create jobs, we managed to actually create innovations in the market and actually create also the very steady pipeline of startups for the investors to actually invest in. Sectors change, they go and rise. Now we're talking about AI. A couple of years ago, it was fintech. A few years before that, it was maybe social networks and social media. So I think the technology cycle keeps evolving and it will keep changing and does impact, of course, how we look at our investment thesis and where we invest and how much and all of that. But I think one thing that will never change about Africa, that Africa will never stop breeding talent, right? And we keep, like, for example, we always talk about like the brain drain in Egypt, and I think Egypt graduates around like 30,000 computer engineers every year from like local schools in Egypt. And even if we lose like maybe 1/3 of them, and maybe they are the best, but still you are left with like 20,000 software engineers or computer engineers who still want to find jobs and will be recruited in startups, and they will come up with amazing tech innovations and all of that. So, and this is like not just Egypt, many places in Africa is like this. We might actually lose some of the talent, hopefully momentarily or like temporarily, and with your efforts and many other people's efforts, we try to bring them back, and they do come back in many ways, either as investors, either as like they work with startups, or they they are founders and start startups themselves. But the talent perspective is really important, and we're hoping that this cycle actually will correct itself quickly. It's also like from like when and how long it will take for this to be a self-sustaining ecosystem. And the word ecosystem, we use the word ecosystem a lot, but ecosystem means that you don't need external help. An ecosystem should thrive and grow without any external influence or contribution, and should be resilient enough to grow on its own. We are not there yet. Most of emerging markets are not. I think India and maybe South Asia or some of Latin American markets now maybe are at this stage of like a more healthy ecosystem. Africa is not there yet. Maybe it will take us somewhere between 5 to 10 years. But we're very confident that it will happen, right? Mainly because of like the talent aspect. It's a big market. We have seen many, like just the idea that in a country like Kenya with M-Pesa, and how you went from almost no banking to like just mobile money, directly, and it took Egypt like almost 20 years to go to like mobile money. We want to see more of these like examples happening, and I think Africa is the best place actually to experience this kind of transformative technologies and deploy them on the ground.
Right. So you're both long on Africa. It's a place to be in the long run. We think we'll get to a place where, dollar for dollar, it's the place for investors to put their money. And we know that there is certainly a role for entrepreneurs to play, but also there's a bigger ecosystem and maybe a little bit of luck involved as well. This is an AI and technology panel after all, and I feel sometimes we can be a little bit lazy in talking about startups and assume that it means technology. Can you guys just maybe take a few quick moments, and we'll move at pace, but if you can just try and characterize, for the members of the audience, what almost the remit of the technology space in Africa, what it represents, what its size is, where it starts and where it ends, or is it synonymous with startups, or is it a subset of startups? And then it'll be great if we can get into a few examples of what you think is actually hot right now in terms of success stories, but also sectors where people should be looking at.
I can, let me talk about the stuff I know, and then Ramesh can talk more broadly. So we're fintech specialists, so I can give you a view on fintech, which is a large part of the technology stack, so maybe that helps. I think the first wave of investments we saw in Africa, unsurprisingly, were in payment infrastructure companies. So these were the likes of Fowry, Paymob, Flutterwave, Paystack. The next wave of companies built on top of that payment infrastructure. So these were consumer fintech companies that were offering banking services. So I'm talking about MoneyPoint, Fairmoney, other challenger banks that build on top of that. Now I think where we are at the frontier in fintech is going back and looking at the infrastructure, the core infrastructure, and rebuilding it. So let me take an example. We just led around in a company called Zone. It's a Nigerian company that is building a permissioned blockchain for switching. Switching is how money moves between banks. And it's a licensed switch that is completely revamping what is a pretty unsexy and boring but fundamental part of the infrastructure. I also think the same revolution will happen in other boring sectors like accepting digital payments, where things will move from dumb POS machines to QR codes to smart software on the machine like Toast, for example. So we've seen globally the entire payment infrastructure revamp, and I think that revolution is coming to Africa. So I think core infrastructure is one. Cross-border payments is another one. That could be a bit of the VC hype right now because what happens with cross-border payments is you earn dollar revenues. And so everybody's flying to anything that earns them dollar revenues to save them from depreciating currencies. But I think it's completely broken, cross-border payments in Africa. And I think there's a lot of painstaking little revolutions that can happen, like just reducing correspondent banking hops, so on and so forth. So cross-border, core infrastructure, cross-border. And then finally, I'm still a big believer in the power of stablecoins for retail investors to store their capital and not get eroded by inflation, and also as a settlement rail for payments between companies and countries. And we have invested in a couple of companies. So again, I think 3 Cs, core infrastructure, crypto at the end of it, and challenger banks.
Okay, thank you. And does AI have a part to play in any?
Yes, so I look at AI as a horizontal as opposed to a vertical. What we have seen, I'll tell you what we have seen and then what we are going to see in very quickly and then pass it on to Ramez. What we've seen is our portfolio companies reducing the number of engineers needed to code for a certain module. And so I think the most realistic, relevant use is an AI-driven copilot that helps a 10x engineer reduce their team by 3 or 4 people. That's what's happening now. Now, does that lead to job loss? I don't believe that. That's another debate we can have. I think those people will then move to become 10x engineers. And I think where we are going with this is if you look at, if you just divide AI into 3, one is the NVIDIA chips, the hardware, then the open source large language models like ChatGPT, et cetera, and so on. ChatGPT is not fully open source, but Llama is, for example. And then applications built on top of that. I think where there are opportunities in Africa, and we've made a very early stage investment here, is on the application layer. Don't try to compete with the chips, obviously. Don't try and build a large language model that is horizontal. Build a vertical application on top of that where you have some defensibility because you have unique data. So we invested in this company called Toom AI. It's a Moroccan company that is using African language libraries to build a conversational NLP AI that will help telephone companies, for example, deal with their customer complaints in vernacular language. That's not a problem that the big guys from the US are going to attack. And there you have a defensible advantage because you have that local library on which you can train AI. So that's my perspective.
All right, fantastic. There is a comment you made, which I'd love to come back to later, which is, ultimately you're saying you should focus on the application layer and some of the infrastructure should be left. There is a wider question around what does that mean for Africa's position in the global space in the future, but we'll come back to that. Yeah, thank you. Loris?
I fully agree actually with your point regarding AI being more of like horizontal rather than a vertical. I don't think AI will ever be like a specific sector that we focus on.
Right.
We expect that many of startups, they should utilize as many technologies as possible out there to try to optimize their operations, improve their like tech performance, all of that. And I think definitely AI is one of like the main frontier technologies that can help with this. And we have seen that kind of shift happening even within our startups. Like even if they might not have integrated AI in their products before now, I think we have done a survey recently to see how many of our portfolio companies actually started incorporating AI into their operation, and the number was like around 50 to 60%, just over the last year. Like actually they didn't have AI integration before, and now they are utilizing it in a certain way. We have seen many AI-focused applications coming or pipeline startups coming, especially to be funded through our new Africa-based fund. And we give them all the attention, but they are more skewed towards as well like software development when it comes to how AI is being utilized. Not really heavy infrastructure. They are like somewhere between the application layer and that middle layer of like the ChatGPT. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm not sure about like how this works vis-a-vis what we need in Africa and like the infrastructure available out there. Like sometimes we're talking about like, AI and then people don't have access to like power or clean water. But then AI could actually help with that, right?
Yeah.
So it can help optimize the resources in a certain way, can help give people access to a larger pool of opportunities that maybe wasn't available before as well. One of our companies in Tunisia, for example, called What Now, it's a smart meter for electricity. And now, since they have integrated AI, I think they have seen significant growth in terms of their sales and also the power savings that they can create. Like they are focused on the North Africa market, but also they have started deploying their product in different parts in West Africa. And definitely, AI helped a lot when it comes to like power, like managing the power consumption in these countries. One of the amazing companies that we are very proud of, although it's not an investment by Flat 6 Labs at all, but also in Tunisia, InstaDeep, which is a Tunisia UK success story. They started as like a data-focused company, and they have started integrating AI heavily and became one of the biggest success stories to be born out of Tunisia by Tunisian engineers who are based in London. And now have seen many of them, actually they are coming back, like the two founders of InstaDeep, they have been starting investing heavily in the Tunisian startup ecosystem, and also spreading this culture of AI and creating the next wave of data and AI-driven startups in Tunisia, which is also amazing. We have a very similar company to yours, actually called Robodesk in Egypt as well, that is also developing AI models for like call centers and for banks to manage their relationships with their customers in a much better way. Language is a big barrier when it comes I think ChatGPT has almost full support for Arabic, for example, now, and some even local dialects in our countries. However, again, in terms of NLP and how you can actually build the models and cope up with what's required to serve the customers in real time, I think it's still behind. And I feel like local engineers having the local context and culture, the cultural aspect of it can definitely help achieve this much better.
So is there a sector, Mayor mentioned fintech, is there a sector that you're particularly?
So funnily enough, actually, our thesis is fintech doesn't really work that amazingly well with seed investments. Like for us, if you think about it, that we invest usually somewhere between $100,000 to $200,000 as a first check in a startup. I don't think there's a fintech out there that can take like just a $100,000 check and actually achieve the product market fit within like say 6 months in terms of like the cycle of licensing and the regulations and working with banks if needed, of course. It depends, of course, on like the kind of tech they are developing and how they are like a B2B or B2C or all of that. But like fintech happens to be a bit capital intensive. And for a seed investor like us, actually we haven't seen that like the top of our startups are not fintech startups. Especially over the last 5 years, they are within health tech, ed tech, logistics, SaaS, rather than actually fintech. So that doesn't mean that we're against fintech. Of course, it's one of the main sectors we focus on. But again, we haven't seen the cycle of like the maturity or the exit for a seed investor who would invest $100,000 to wait out till actually the exit to happen in a fintech startup. And hopefully this changes with AI.
Can I make a quick point on this? Because I think you're absolutely right. And then I'll let you get back to other hot sectors. One of my hopes from AI is to reduce the initial capital required to build a fintech company. And therefore level the playing field. And I think this is really possible because the biggest line item in the OpEx of any company's P&L is salaries. And if you have 2 outstanding engineers that can use Copilot products to build code much faster and much cheaper, I think that will be a sea change in Africa. Because, and maybe this is a pet peeve of mine, but generally VCs say, we don't care about macro. We are buying deeply out of money options, and they will come into money sometime, and it doesn't matter, like macro moves in cycles. I don't think that is true for Africa. And the reason it's not true for Africa is because the VCs that say this are in markets where if you invest in seed, Series A, Series B, Series C is available, and they're only talking about exits, and they'll exit at the right time. I think in Africa, you have to care about macro cycles because if you invest at the top of the cycle and it's coming down, there's no Series A. It's not coming. Series B is not coming, and then that's it. So startups are dependent upon the capital stack, which is still thin in Africa. I hope that grows. It will take time. So coming back to AI bridging a bit of the talent and capital gap would be a very cool thing for Africa. Sorry,
I fully agree, actually. I wholeheartedly agree. That has been the case, right? So like definitely fintech is capital intensive and have seen really a lot of like disruption that could happen with utilizing tech in maybe other sectors like education and health. One of our companies in Egypt called Shifa, which is it's a very well Africa-funded startup because we have like 5 different African VCs investing in it. It was like one of the first startups in Egypt to start attracting capital from sub-Saharan Africa, which actually it helps people get the medicine delivered. Actually, it started, the founder is a cancer survivor, and she always struggled to find like the fastest way to actually deliver her medicine. So she started this company, and now they are operating in 3 different countries and have an amazing growth. And actually, they've started incorporating also AI, which helped a lot with the product development, and especially when it comes to deploying the product into new markets that might actually take a lot. Like now, I think the cycle of deployment in these new markets have become much shorter because of AI for them.
So I'm not entirely sure how much time we've got left. I'd love to open up for audience for a couple of questions before we come back to a few topics. But yeah, so we've got one back there. So starting about your questions, single sentence with a question mark at the end, please. But just very quickly, so what we're hearing is, firstly, technology, it seems, is the bulk of the opportunity, or technology enablement is the bulk of the opportunity. AI, you're seeing more as a horizontal versus a vertical, so akin to the combustion engine replacing the horse versus...
Yeah.
Good analogy, yeah.
And the opportunity is actually spread across the board.
Absolutely.
We're hearing fintech, we're hearing utilities, we're hearing logistics, we're hearing everything. Okay. Questions?
I'll just talk loud.
Okay.
All right, just bring the mic. Okay, thank you. I'm Wilmot Allen. Good morning, everyone. I'm from Nairobi by way of the U.S. And my question for the panel is this. First of all, Charles, congratulations on your work. I've been following Move Me Back for a while, as you know. And it relates to combining artificial intelligence with applied intelligence. When it comes to the social sector, how can we better leverage AI and tech in Africa? My context is life science company from Detroit, Michigan, moving to Nigeria, soon into Kenya, focusing on sickle cell disease, cardiovascular, where obviously the diaspora-owned company has intel into what is like a perfect product market fit in Nigeria for sickle cell disease. But how can we better leverage AI? And in the process, we'd love to hear more about overcoming this diaspora gap for Africa that's just focused primarily on remittances, notwithstanding the great work of Move Me Back. That's where the lion's share is. Because again, applied intelligence and artificial intelligence, I think, is the dynamic combination if we particularly can apply it to the social sector. Thank you.
I'm not sure if I have an answer.
So your question...
So my question is the social sector, AI implications for the social sector, but understanding that the human agency, particularly with diaspora and the social sector, is really, really important.
And when you say social sector, what are you talking about?
Healthcare, education. Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that.
No, listen, I don't know. That's my answer to what is the specific application of AI in healthcare or other sectors. I'm no expert. But as I said, I think what I would love to see would be a reduction in the resources required to run these businesses. And that is more pertinent in Africa than anywhere else because the capital stack to finance these businesses is so thin. The other vector I would love to see improvement is a few capable people doing more, increase in productivity, which is saying the same thing but in a slightly different way because the talent shortage is also a real problem in Africa. But I do not have specific applications because it's not my sector. I'm sorry.
I mean, if I can add a few thoughts. I think certainly when we think of AI and its application, I think when it comes to Africa, it needs to be applied in a slightly different way. Okay. Yeah, so when we think of AI and its application in Africa, I think what we need to accept is that the application needs to be somewhat different than what we see in advanced economies, US, UK, Europe, whatever. In particular, I think we come from an environment which is very unstructured, which fundamentally is a lot of people who ultimately don't have a voice and are not visible and are not that integrated in a structural way into various economies and various industries. And I think maybe that's the role that AI has to play, or those who are going to leverage AI, because fundamentally there's a lot of talk around Africa's greatest asset being its people, 1.4 billion people, going on 4 billion by the end of the century, or 2.5 billion by the middle of the century. But for me, it's either a big opportunity or a ticking time bomb. And what we're doing is we're pumping lots and lots of people into the industry, into the space, into the market, but that's kind of disconnected. And so if we can think of how we can leverage AI, or entrepreneurs or innovators can leverage AI to actually better connect people, whether it's to research, whether it's to get their data and be able to do sickle cell analysis, etc. I think that's where maybe the effort needs to be spent. Yeah. The last 50, 100 years, we've seen a lot of advancement in how other countries have been able to integrate people and integrate various bits of infrastructure into their economies. And I think that's where Africa's been lagging, and we've heard some of those examples here. So I think AI might be a tool to catch up, and in some cases even I hate to use the word leapfrog, the way in which people and systems are integrated into our economies.
Allow me to add just one appendix to that. Very well said, Charles. I think AI businesses are global businesses by default. So if there is an African AI business that is going to get funded and be successful, there has to be a defensible moat. So for example, I wouldn't think that there would be a coding AI that succeeds in Africa. I think that ship has sailed. Let's be realistic. What are the sectors where there's a defensible data training advantage? Customer service in local languages is one. Maybe healthcare and sickle cell treatment is another, where medical histories of that gene pool that is specific to Africa makes a difference. That's for you to determine. But that training data, proprietary training data that's defensible, is crucial. Otherwise, I think it's very difficult.
Quick question. Which LLMs are open to working with African companies? Is there anybody in the AI space? Because you talked about infrastructure, LLM, application, focus on application.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't have LLM or infrastructure, you still can't do anything. So is there anybody out there open to working with African companies on applications?
They've all exposed to APIs that you can plug into. ChatGPT has APIs, Llama has APIs. It's not restricted. These are global APIs.
But in a case where an application might need any partnership, is there anybody that you could imagine?
You don't have to handshake with an LLM. You can just access an API unless other people have. Yeah, you can just buy the APIs. It's per API call. These are SaaS businesses now. So it's open. It's good. It's good news. You don't have to handshake with someone in the valley, unlike funding.
Right. Okay.
We've got a question here.
Hi guys, my name is Jote from Econox Group, based in Kenya. I agree with you. AI is a horizontal. We're seeing more and more opportunities, cases for AI enablement across business verticals. How should traditional businesses be thinking about it in these early days? Because we're all curious. Second question is for Ramez. What is working with Tunisia and AI talent? I mean, there seems to be something that's really working, and I'd like to understand.
I don't know, regarding the first question, I'll give you an example of what we have done at AFSIC Labs itself, right? So we have started this initiative, I think 6 months ago, where we actually asked every single person in the company to start thinking about how they can do their job better utilizing AI. Giving them the resources, a little bit of training, where they can start, all of this, and many of them, they came back and said, by the way, we have been doing this, like spending 3 hours to just do this small task, and now we can just do it efficiently in 10, 15 minutes. I think this is like a great example of how we can, like maybe many traditional businesses, even if they are not really tech-focused or tech-enabled, to start actually think about how they can incorporate AI, just to see what's out there and start reflecting on their business and how they can improve what they do on a daily basis. The second question, to be honest, I don't know. I think maybe we have like other, like maybe Tunisian colleagues in the room who can answer this question. But I think Tunisia has like an advantage and disadvantage at the same time. The advantage is education is actually quite strong. For decades, it has been quite strong in Tunisia, and it's something that the government and the people in Tunisia actually invested in heavily. So they created so many actually very bright minds over several generations in Tunisia. The second thing is actually because it's a very small market. Many of actually, most of the talent there are French speaking, and actually many of them now are English speaking. So actually they always get exposed to other parts of in Africa or Europe for education or for work opportunities. And because like that has to be the nature of how you do it. And I think like we can like draw similar examples with many other African countries that are maybe tied to like a larger economy next to them, for example. So Tunisia is a great example of this, where it can be connected to like the bigger economies because of its very small market scale.
All right. And so I think we're out of time. We've been all around the continent. We've been all across various sectors. Just to round off, just in 30 seconds, can you guys just give the audience maybe your wish list for what you'd love for them to go out and do to further build the ecosystem when it comes to technology and investing in Africa?
Invest more in African talent. I think that's the only thing we need to do. And support them as much as we can in different ways.
Thank you. For you?
I would say to entrepreneurs, be realistic, build contribution margin positive businesses, and have when you go to market in your own hands. That's the entrepreneurs, because the cycles move like this. And for funders, let's not create an unsubstantiated AI bubble that will burst and destroy capital.
All right. And just finally for me, I'd say the one thing we probably need to think about as we progress into AI is to look at what's happened in history with technology cycles, whether it's the gunpowder revolution, whether it's the combustion engine revolution. Historically, we've been told that these things technically enable those countries that are behind to catch up and speed up. But what we've also seen is those nations and those regions that develop these technologies first often have a disproportional competitive advantage over others. And that actually creates a bigger gap, right? When you also think of the role that gunpowder, for example, played in colonization. So we do need to think whether we operate purely at the application layer or whether there is something to be said for building infrastructure and actually competing at a far more fundamental level. And that's my question or my ask to people in the room to consider that as we move forward and we think about the applications of technology and AI and fundamentally what it needs to be there to solve for, which is people's lives, whether it's food, health, education, nutrition, and what have you. But on that note, we are over time. Thank you for being a very engaged audience. Thank you for our panelists for their wisdom and for their experience and the work that they do on the continent. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your days. If you have any other questions, I'm sure we'll be hanging around and you can grab us and corner us, and we'll see you later. Thank you.
Thank you.